listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This podcast is sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. It's not about the destination. It's about going someplace you never thought possible. Go to imaginenext.ingrammicro.com to find out more. Let's get into it.
Hi, B2B Tech Talk listeners. This is part 2 of my conversation with futurist Matt Griffin. So if you haven't yet, I would definitely recommend checking out part 1 in the previous episode, as this episode will make much more sense if you do that. So last time we were talking about what the future of work will look like. Well, today we will talk about how you and your business can prepare and be ahead. A little hint, it's about having open discussions, planning, getting creative, training, and maybe even starting your own business. I hope you enjoyed the actionable steps Matt gives in part 2 of this conversation.
It's fairly straightforward. In fact, it's fairly straightforward.
Well, my follow-up to this is, because again, you kind of got into the white collar standpoint, because a lot of people think like they're fine, but you just said, no, wait a second, you will have to learn new skills. But my question here is, it's straightforward, but the access to education on it is not, and unless I'm incorrect here, because I personally am very involved in the voice technology space, for example. And a lot of those people are kind of building the education at the same time that they're building everything else. And so a lot of companies are saying, okay, I see this growing, but I don't even know who I'm supposed to be looking for. I guess an engineer could maybe do it, or, they're not really sure. And so it's kind of developing as it's here and growing. So when you're talking about this kind of quantum computing software engineer as well, like, where do people go to get trained and learn this education or know who they should be looking for?
So in terms of knowing who you look for, so typically organizations should have something like a foresight team. So this company that made 17,000 positions redundant without making any person redundant, because they just moved them into new positions because they had the foresight to actually see change coming. In their particular case, they had a foresight team, and they were able to very quickly put together a relatively decent list of, these are the roles that are going to dead end. These are roughly the times when these roles will dead end, and then these are the roles that we think basically are going to be relevant in the future. And while I use quantum computers as an example, basically there's lots of different examples I can use. So on the one hand, basically you need an organization with a foresight team that has a link into the CEO or the executive board, so they have proper oversight and proper governance, and they have stakeholders basically who actually care about making sure that they deliver the outcomes that they need to deliver. But then in terms of then seeing the jobs of the future starting to come through, this is where you then need to create competency matrices. And when you have a look at the competency matrices, all jobs have 2 types of competencies at a very high level. You've got soft competencies, which are, do you work well with a team? Are you a nice chap or a nice lady? And then you have the hard competencies, the hard skills, basically, which is, okay, you work very well together with your teammates, or, with the teammates that we think we might put you with, but do you know your stuff? Are you a good cybersecurity expert, or whatever it happens to be? So you've got soft skills and you've got hard skills. When we look at soft skills, we can quite quickly map those out. It's things like empathy, collaboration, creativity, resourcefulness, all those kinds of things. When it comes to the hard skills, that's where you have to be able to define what the job actually is going to be. So using this sort of the Ocado case study, that's a case of, we have robots in the future. We think we will have robots in the future that look like this. They will have a combination of artificial intelligence, advanced servos, and animatronics. They will have machine vision, et cetera, et cetera. They will be made and constructed in this particular way. Therefore, we think that we will need people with these types of hard skills. And the hard skills basically need to flex. So this is where you need adaptability sort of baked into the model. And what you can do in that particular case is you work either with inside or outside the stakeholders, and you say, we see these jobs coming through in the future. Let's say, for example, the use of artificial intelligence in the cybersecurity space, which means that we end up with human and artificial intelligence hybrid roles basically coming through in the shorter term. You work with internal and external stakeholders to say, what kind of skills and training would we need for somebody who might do some job that looks a bit like this? and you just put it together, and you're not going to get it 100% right, but you're going to generally be in the ballpark unless you're a bunch of idiots. Yeah, I mean, yeah, even if you have a look at some of the vaccines that we've got coming through, we've got artificial intelligences that are putting together artificial genomes, in which case it's a case of, I have an artificial intelligence that can put together an artificial human genome. Why? What would we do with that? And then what kind of human skills basically would be useful to complement that particular artificial intelligence and helping it do, or us do, whatever it is that we want to do. Maybe you want to use that to create a new drug or whatever it is you're up to, or a new alien life form or something like that. It's not that difficult, but you need to be having the conversations. But you also need an executive team, basically, who actually gives you some leeway, because you aren't going to be getting everything right. And when you have a look at the organizations that are actually maneuvering themselves into leadership positions, particularly when we talk about HR and talent, but also in terms of business, they are very, very supportive. You can tell the organizations basically that will win in the future and the organizations that won't, because the organizations that have got a closed and shut down culture, they're the ones basically that'll just get kicked to the curb. Whereas the organizations basically that are able to see really sort of 5 to 10 years, you don't need to look any sort of further out than that at the minute as an organization. Those are the organizations that are typically a little bit more proactive. They're asking the tough questions, and they're inviting answers, and they're trying to navigate it, but they're trying to do stuff. And again, we've seen quite a lot of really good results, basically, with organizations that, as I said, haven't actually made people redundant, even when they could have. Wall Street would have thanked them, basically, for the extra profits and extra dividends, basically, had they made all these tens of thousands of people redundant.
Well, I think you bring up a good point from a company perspective. Again, it's really about having a real conversation, really being a little more open-minded, thinking you kind of laid stuff out. But on the other side, especially now, we're here now in November 2020. A lot of people are looking for work. They're looking and saying, maybe they're 30s, 40s, 50s. They're saying, okay, I see this trend. Or you have kids going to college saying, I see this trend. Where do I get the education? Where do I get the information? Do I go to school? Is there stuff online? As much as there's so many things online to find, I think it's very hard to find certifications or knowledge to get into this. So do you have any advice for those on the other side that are noticing this trend, that want to get in on it? Like, where can they look to get educated?
Absolutely. So there was a massive hole. So I ended up creating Exponential University to fill the hole. And the reason basically why I created Exponential University is because when it comes to, should we say, futures thinking, so providing people basically with the thinking and the tool sets that they need to either create their own future careers or navigate future careers and the future landscape, there wasn't anything. There literally wasn't anything. And that's the scary thing. My kids are going through industrial age education at the moment, and they are being prepared for jobs that I can already see being made redundant. So there's that. But when you have a look at the global recession back in sort of 2008, 2009, it was a kind of similar situation. We had huge numbers of people being made redundant relatively unexpectedly. Lots of them basically were very highly skilled. The jobs market was saturated with people who were looking for employment. Those highly skilled people were looking at low-skilled jobs, just trying to get a job so that they could earn money for their families. But when all was said and done, when we have a look at one of the biggest impacts of the global recession, when people were looking for jobs, we would see loads and loads of people filling in hundreds and hundreds of online, job applications and everything else, and just getting nothing in return. At that point, in about 2009, 2010, we saw a huge uptick in the number of people that became entrepreneurs. They just started their own businesses because they said, look, I'm good at something. I can't get a job doing the thing that I want to do. I can't even get a job doing the things that I don't want to do. I do need to still earn money though. So what have I got in my own kit bag that I can use? And we saw a huge number of people, flood into not just the gig economy, but actually we saw 100 million new company startups registered just in those couple of years. And I think it's going to be the same now. I know lots and lots of people basically have been made redundant, basically from all sorts of different organizations, and they have all sorts of different skills. And the vast majority of them are finding it increasingly hard and incredibly difficult to find any job in any sector for any wage. So, but today, if you do take a punt, it's easy to, I mean, it sounds really stupid, but it's easy to create a website. I started my business basically with $50. I was made redundant a number of times. So I've been in that hot seat. This is sort of why I do what I do as well. The reason why I try to help organizations predict and see what's coming down the line is so that they can prepare their workforces for what's coming tomorrow. Because with the companies that I worked for, and they were typically Fortune 100 organizations that I worked for, there was one organization alone that made 50,000 people redundant, basically when the word cloud started rolling around in the technology in the technology industry. That's unattainable. So when it comes to trying to find, should we say, your new calling, there's a Japanese system called Ikagi.
Yes, I love it.
You know that one? Yeah.
I do, yes.
And I actually wrote about it yesterday. So you've got
for those that don't know what it is, can you tell what it is?
And they asking. So Ikagi basically is a Japanese model or framework for finding your reason for being. Put simply, it has a number of different factors. So look for something that you are passionate about. Look for something that the world needs. Look for something that you can do. And then look for something that other people care about. So it's just literally Google it. So Google Ikagi, basically, then have a look at Google Images, and you'll see these different sort of Venn diagram type things. When it comes to trying to find, what we call is sort of your exponential purpose, it's a combination of a variety of different things. You've got to find something that you love. You've got to be able to find something basically that you can turn into a business and that you can make money out of, because unfortunately we have to make money, and all these other bits and pieces. But when we start having a look at the number of people who are in jobs today, there was a US Department of Labor report out a little while ago. So this was kind of 2019 before the pandemic. 67% of people who are actually in jobs today don't like the jobs that they're actually in, let alone the companies that they might be working for. So if 2/3 basically of the American workforce don't fundamentally like the jobs that they're doing, you then have to ask the question of, why are you doing it? And today it is easier to set up a business than ever before. It's easier basically to spread yourself online than ever before. Creating products and executing a good go-to-market, that's still the difficult thing to do. We've all got different ideas. If I went to your audience basically and asked every single one of them, what would you really like to do? I'd say you probably get about 30% that would say, I'd really love to do this. The other 60% would probably be 70%. My maths is rubbish. The other 60 to 70% would probably kind of say, well, I've kind of got an idea, but not really sure. I'd have to have a think about it and get back to you. The first thing to do is basically think about the things that you would really like to do, and then find a way to do it. Using modern technologies, you can make a difference on the global stage now, basically in a way that you could never have done 10 to 20 years ago. I mean, look at Greta Thunberg. If we moved back 30 to 40 years, how many people would have actually heard of her? The fact that we have 3.5 billion people connected to the internet with smart devices and all these kinds of other things now means basically that she's been able to create a message. She's been able to hit the right levers, her content's been able to go viral, and suddenly everyone on the planet has heard of her. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, basically no one would have heard of her other than people basically maybe in her local country. So that's the kind of power that we're now dealing with. So if we can now start flipping the conversation to, if as an individual you have access to increasingly powerful technologies and tools that allow you to do the things that you want to do, the question then becomes, how are you going to do it? And things like training. If you don't know how to do something, we've got two ways of learning things today, the formal system and the informal system. The formal system is school, universities, education. The informal system is YouTube and all those kinds of other things. You want to learn how to do Python programming. There's a YouTube course for that you can look at it for free. What's stopping you? You want to figure out how to do clothes design. You want to figure out basically how to run virtual events basically with green screens like I'm trying to do at the minute, which is fun, drives you nuts. Yeah, you can do that. YouTubers are my best friends at the moment. You've got more access to information and skills and experts and resources basically than you have ever had before. Yeah, if you want to know, so for example, making the offer, if someone wants to know something, basically, then contact me. It's cheap, it's free. So today, when we start having a look at the impact of the global pandemic, you can do two things, and you'll probably end up doing both. Well, you'll do one, but you should really be doing both. On the one hand, basically, if you've been made redundant, you're going to continue looking for a job, and good luck to you. On the other hand, though, start really thinking basically about what it is that you want to do and find a way to do it. There are people to support you. It is incredibly difficult. It's, being an entrepreneur is definitely not a straight line, as I always say, but you have the potential now basically to change your lives and to change the lives of other people around you, as well as on the other side of the planet, in ways that you could never have done 10 to 20 years ago. So it's a mindset. It's difficult sort of getting into these new mindsets, but if I gave you access to 3.5 billion people on the planet to go and sell your stuff to, what would you sell? Who would you sell it to? And then the rest is the how. They call it crossing the chasm in the corporate world. And there's lots of different ways basically that we can cross that chasm.
I love it. If people are listening, I hope you're smiling and inspired like I am right now. I think, you talked kind of from two positions here. If you are someone who has a leadership position in an organization, in a company, it's time to have that conversation. It's time to be thinking more open-mindedly, more in 10 to 20 years. Like you said, how can we retrain our people? What do we need to do? And then you talked about being on the other side, if you are kind of job hunting, to really kind of think about what it is that you want to do. There's so many resources, like you said, as technology is growing, there is stuff here. You just have to take the time to learn it and to do it. Is there anything else that you want to share from kind of a positive standpoint of all of these changes going on, of what we can do to protect ourselves against being impacted by all the disruption, but also really flourish within it, especially in the B2B technology space, which is our primary audience for this show?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to disruption, you've got two types of disruption. You've got the thing that disrupted you because you didn't see it coming. You then have the thing that disrupted you that you did see coming, but you didn't do anything about. And while basically most people will actually excuse the first, they definitely won't excuse the second. So when we start talking about disruption, get a point of view, get out of your comfort zones, basically have a look at all of the different things that are going on, whether you're looking at innovation accelerators, entrepreneurial communities, universities, and other sort of corporate labs, outside of your own industries as well. Go and get a point of view, because as I typically say with a lot of my keynotes, I can show you a way to disrupt every single industry on the planet. So go and have a look at my keynotes. There's videos all over the place, basically, and whether it's construction, whether it's retail, basically, whether it's healthcare or whether it's transportation, we can turn every single one of those on their heads today. So disruption is coming for you, whether you like it or not, and you can bury your head in the sand, but frankly, it's going to come and get you sooner or later, because we've always been disrupted. The world has always changed. We are no longer using horses and carts. We're no longer basically going to artesian wells, basically to get the water, that we drink, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the next one, basically, that organizations need to really think carefully about, basically, is actually having an open and acceptable culture. There are huge numbers of people working within all organizations today, basically, that don't get to say anywhere near the top table on how they think the company should either evolve or change, let alone basically the new things that they think the company might be interested in, and so on and so forth. Thirdly, leadership. They always say that the best leaders are the people that prepare their employees for life without them. A little bit like parents, the ultimate role basically of a parent basically is to make themselves redundant so that children no longer need to rely on them. When they fly the coop. It's the same with leaders. I've had plenty of people who've managed me in the past, and that's just frankly been rubbish. I've had very few people who've been inspirational leaders, but the people who have been basically have now actually They said one of the sort of the pieces of advice I got given a long time ago basically was become your own brand. And when you think about it, it actually kind of makes a lot of sense, because whether you're moving from the company you're in today to another company, if you have a brand, and by brand, we're typically talking about everything that we think of as a brand: skills, personality, references, authenticity, and all those kinds of things, you're more likely to get the job than the other person, and so on and so forth. And then when we start actually having a look at trying to see the future and lead the future, go out there, explore, get a point of view, look and explore in lots and lots of different places. But you've got to start building it. And you can build the future very, very cheaply. So on the one hand, you could spend lots of money, basically, for example, building product A from scratch, or you can run different competitions. And we sort of end up running quite a lot of competitions ourselves to help solve global challenges, basically like sort of inequality, energy poverty, water poverty, education, should we say, poverty, and all that sort of stuff. And when you run competitions, basically, you sort of put up, say, $10,000 to $50,000, you'll be amazed at how much people spend to try to solve that problem for you. The typical return is, if you put a prize fund up of about $50,000, and it takes about 2 years to build these communities up, but if you put a prize fund of $50,000 up, typically other startups and other organizations will spend around $10 to $15 million trying to solve your problem for you. And then you just buy that, or you buy them. So disruption is increasingly fast nowadays. Just as I gave you the Toyota example, when we have creative machines that are able to create new products, we took electric vehicle battery development from 2 years to 16 days. We took drug development basically from decades down to 21 days for 30,000 drugs. We have NASA using generative machines to design lunar rovers basically within a week. It would normally take them years. The list goes on. We have Adidas using generative machines to create new styles of trainers basically in a day. Same with Under Armour, whereas normally from concept to shelf, it would typically take them about 18 months. Now we're talking concept to shelf typically in about 2 days. If you want to have a lot of lunches and have a couple of weekends in there, 2 weeks. You get an artificial intelligence to make the product, to design the product for you, 3D print it, which is a whole process sort of thing. The speed of change is accelerating like crazy. And just to sort of finish this one off, if I ask the audience, do you think we're moving faster today than we did 10 years ago? Certainly in my experience, basically with audiences, about 90 to 99% of people say yes. And then if I say to you, in the year 2030, do you think we're going to be moving faster in the year 2030 as a society than we are in 2020? Yeah, okay, we've had lockdown and things. Basically, typically the answer is going to be yes again. You can see things accelerating with your own eyes. We are moving faster today than we did yesterday, and that's accelerating away. So it's not a question of when things change, it's a question of how are they going to change, basically, and then what are you going to do about it? And in terms of what are you going to do about it, it's not rocket science. Go out, explore, get a point of view, experiment, basically, embrace an open culture, ask people, get involved, play about with things, break things, et cetera, et cetera. It's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, well, as you said earlier, I think it is a mindset thing too, of being open and having multiple opinions. I always talk about inclusivity and diversity of thought. So it's good to have a variety of people in the room. So I like that you're bringing that to light here. Now, you've worked with some companies as well. Can you share with us maybe one or two of them that you've worked with, how you've helped them to think far into the future and how they're changing the way they work now to better prepare for the future, as you just spoke about?
Yeah, sure. So, I've got loads. So we've got organizations basically like Accenture. So, for example, Accenture basically typically talk about the life in the post-digital world. So that's particularly when we start talking about the way that companies themselves are actually going to be run in the future. So with a lot of the work basically that I do for them, It's simply showing them the art of the possible. And typically the way I show people the art of the possible is by showing them videos, because if I say that in the future, we will have fully autonomous companies, you can get shot down as a futurist just as, yeah. When you actually show people these things running, it's a very different experience, and you can see the light bulbs going on in their eyes. Other companies basically like Disney. So for example, with Disney want to be able to use artificial intelligence to create the next Marvel blockbusters. So this is typically where you can think of creative machines, basically, or synthetic media and content coming into play. And again, we have a whole variety of different things basically sort of playing there. Typically, basically, when I work with organizations, you put out a timeline. You figure out basically what are the things that they care about. You then plot a timeline. And when we talk about technology itself is a rocket ship. And what I mean by that is, think of anything that is science fiction in your heads now. Doesn't matter what it is. Tractor beams, holograms, molecular assemblers, streaming your brain to YouTube, all these kinds of things. Self-evolving robots, self-manufacturing robots, artificial intelligences that self-evolve. Those are already here. They're already science fact. And again, I've got a whole bunch of articles and everything else, and you can go and prod around, and you can go and have a conversation basically with the research labs who are making the world's first molecular assemblers and ask them how they're doing it. You can even go and make your own. So technology is a rocket ship. Everything that you think of as science fiction basically is pretty much already here. And we've got videos to prove it. Holograms basically without augmented reality or without glass or any of those kinds of things. So the holograms that we kind of see in 2049, Blade Runner, the giant ballerina, those are already here today at a very small level. So we've kind of got that as a starting point. But when we start having a look at when these technologies are actually going to impact your lives, livelihoods, and or businesses, that's where there's this delay. And that delay is typically cultural. It's down to liability. It's down to regulators, affordability, accessibility, and everything else. You can typically think of that as a fully self-driving car. If I parked one outside of your house and told you that it was yours free, if you could drive it, if the regulator says you can't drive it on the public roads, technology is fine, but because the regulator says, no, you can't use it, you can't pick up your free car. So we've got this with Disney, for example. We are already at the point where we have the very basic tools that we need to create decent synthetic video. Then we need to be able to map those synthetic content tools into specific workflows, into the studio workflows, and so on and so forth. And then we need to be able to control the output. With other organizations, so other organizations like Airbus and BMW, we have the future of fully autonomous vehicles, where we talk about everything from hydrogen-powered aircraft. So this is things like the E0, basically, that Airbus recently sort of put out, the future concept cabins, basically in 2050. We talk about how sky taxis, basically, and commercial aviation, basically, will eventually merge in about 2030, and the electrification of aircraft. When we have a look at, say, COLAS, basically, so COLAS are one of the world's largest building and construction organizations. When you can suddenly 3D print a motorway bridge or a office block, that changes your entire business. So again, there we typically talk about the ability to 3D print buildings. And, we started off small. We started off 3D printing entire communities down in Mexico. Now we're 3D printing with companies like Icon, basically, and Apiscore, 3D printing government offices over in Dubai, and so on and so on. So, as I say, typically the way that we sort of work with organizations is you have to understand basically what the organization does. You have to change the culture. And what I mean by that is this. If you go and ask a bank or a retailer what industry they're in, they will say, we're in banking and we're in retail. It's fairly obvious. If you go and ask that exact same question to a technology company, basically like Google, Alibaba, Tencent, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Baidu, and say, what industry are you in? They will come back with, we're in every industry. And have a look at Google with Alphabet. They are literally getting to the point where they're in every industry. So as an individual business leader, you need to get away from this thinking of you are in the banking industry. You are in the anything you want industry, because digital erodes all the different barriers between previously distinct industries like never before. So all of a sudden, if you're a bank, Are you now in the payments industry, but the global payments industry? Are you now in the transportation industry? I mean, if you have a look, for example, at Mercedes, if I went back 10 years ago and I said to Mercedes, I think you should buy Netflix, I'd have been kicked out of the boardroom. Now I could go to them and say, I think you should buy Netflix because what you're doing is you're creating fully autonomous pods. Because if you take the steering wheel, the dashboard and the pedals out of the car, you just have a pod. You are creating fully autonomous pods. And when people are in fully autonomous pods, they want entertaining. So why don't you own the entertainment platform? And it's now a new revenue stream for them. But similarly, again, basically, if I went to companies like, say, Mercedes and GM and Volkswagen and everything else 10 years ago, and I said, in 10 years' time, basically, you'll be spending hundreds of billions of dollars electrifying your cars and getting them to drive themselves. And by the way, you won't be selling those, you won't intend to sell those cars any longer to individual consumers. You'll sell them as a service, mobility as a service. I'd have been kicked out of the boardroom. And yet, 10, 7-ish years down the line, here we are. Every single automotive organization on the planet is making cars that drive themselves, that they no longer sell to the public, that they sell as a service in fleets that are electrified, and they're investing literally hundreds of billions of dollars buying up lithium-ion batteries and securing supplies and doing all sorts of stuff. You know, if you have a look at Teslas, it's an app on wheels. It's no longer really a car. So you have a conversation with an organization, change the mindset, change the culture. Once you've changed the culture, that's about 80 to 90% of the battle. Because after that, it's now, okay, it's a strategy conversation about these are the things that can disrupt you. These are the things you can disrupt these are the things you can use to disrupt other people. What do you want to do? And then it's strategy, and as we sort of call it, crossing the chasm, and off we go. It's not actually that difficult.
Yeah. Well, as you said, changing mindset and culture, I think, is the difficult part.
And this is where the show and tell comes in. That's it. It's I sat down with the CEO of a global construction company recently, and literally you just show them someone 3D printing a building, and you go, that will disrupt your industry, and they go, yeah, but today it's really expensive, and actually it isn't. You can 3D print a 4-bedroom house for about $20,000. And you can do it in about 8 hours, compared to building a house in a traditional way, which takes about 3 months and costs, depending where you are, obviously in the US or in Europe. In the UK, it'll cost you about £200,000 to do the same thing. And technology always gets faster and cheaper. So today, basically, we can 3D print a 4-bedroom house basically for $20,000 in 8 hours. Tomorrow, it'll be $10,000 and it'll be 6 hours. And the days after, it'll be $5,000 basically, and a couple of hours, et cetera, et cetera. When you actually sit down, basically, a lot of my audience and my customers basically are typically C-suite and boardrooms. When you sit down with them and you actually show them the thing that can disrupt them, so they can poke it, they can quantify it, they can, they end up moving beyond the point of it's a load of BS to going, geez, this thing is actually real, it's here. We can actually see it getting sort of faster, more performant and cheaper, in which case, when that happens, what would the impact of that be on our business? And if the answer is it wouldn't be good for your business, you now need a strategy to counter it. So you either counter it, so you either try to kill that technology, as a number of organizations typically try to do, or you go and have a conversation basically with typically the startups that have actually produced these things, and you partner with them, and then eventually you buy them.
Yes, I love all of this. And when you were saying earlier too about think of sci-fi, my first thought, which I'm still waiting for, is like the Jetsons, where you could teleport to a different place. And then I don't know if it was Virgin Galactic or SpaceX, which one it was, that said they're working on being able to go into a rocket ship where you can be anywhere in the world in 30 minutes. I was like, scary, yet I'm on board about that. That would be super exciting.
That's SpaceX, but
is it SpaceX?
Yeah, but that's where they repurpose the rocket industry. So that's a sort of quite an interesting one, because Elon Musk decided that he wanted to disrupt the space industry. And one of the rules of the space industry, sort of back in the noughties, was that you'd launch your satellites into space, basically, and the rocket that you used, the boosters would come off, a little bit like the space shuttle. The boosters would come off, basically, and then they'd plunge into the sea. And those boosters, typically, certainly on the larger rockets, would cost anywhere between about $10 to $40 million. You're just throwing it away. So with Musk, basically what he wanted to do is create a reusable rocket. You know, as he kind of says, he says every time people get into a commercial airliner, when they go from A to B and eventually they reach their destination, you don't just bin the 747, you don't bin the jetliner and then roll out a new one. So he created the Falcon 9 reusable rockets. By getting to the point where you could reuse the rockets, he dropped the cost of launching stuff into space by weight by 100-fold. So all of a sudden, that means that you can now launch things into space 100 times cheaper than you could before. So you're starting to democratize access to space. So he then started with things like the Crew Dragon. So the Crew Dragon is essentially NASA's new taxi service. And if you think about it, if you can put a passenger capsule on the top of a rocket and you can deliver astronauts to the space station, why can't you just deliver them to the other side of the planet? Bearing in mind that he uses drone barges, which sit in international waters. So all he's doing is repurposing traditional space, well, I say traditional, but sort of new traditional space technology. And rather than flying people to the ISS, you just fly to the other side of the planet. But these rockets travel at Mach 27. So a lot of people have had questions about G-forces and the effect of that on the human body, which is a fun one. But when you have a look at where they are, I wrote a little article about 4 months ago because he put out an advert in the Houston Press for engineers that could help him build the launch ports, basically, for these new rockets. Originally, he wanted to be able to get people from one side of the planet to the other within about 30 minutes in around 2024, 2025. They actually are slightly ahead of track. They've got approval from the FAA, basically, to do testing. When you have a look at the current Starship that's currently hopping its way around in tests, that is the passenger capsule. But what he wants to do is he wants to move people from one side of the planet to the other very quickly, but for the cost of a traditional commercial airline ticket. And then when people ask about the environmental impact of rockets, he's actually been working with NASA on a green rocket fuel that, weirdly enough, you can actually put in the post, that cuts greenhouse gas emissions down by about 90 to 95%. Then, of course, being Elon Musk, basically will want to electrify the rockets, which means you need very, very dense electric batteries. We've got artificial intelligences that are now designing a whole mix of lithium ion, but also lithium alternative batteries, as well as polymer batteries and all kinds of graphene batteries and all sorts of things going on there. So eventually these rockets basically will be they won't be environmentally friendly by any stretch, but they'll be more environmentally friendly than the ones that we see today. And then eventually they'll be electrified kind of come 2035, 2040, bearing in mind that we're seeing the electrification of traditional aircraft actually already happening now. That was supposed to be starting in about 2030. So again, we have this acceleration coming through. So yeah, that's a very exciting one. There's a good video of that, which you might have seen, Keri. There's a good video of SpaceX's shenanigans trying to move people from one side of the planet to the other very quickly. And as a weird footnote, the US military has now signed a contract with SpaceX to move troops from one side of the planet to the other in SpaceX rockets at speed.
Matt, I could talk to you all day. This stuff excites me, but I'm going to compose myself here. You obviously, we not only talked about the future of work, but you have a lot of different things that you do and create in the creativity space, the social space. That's also really fascinating. If people want to learn more about anything we talked about, they want to connect with you, check out your website. Where's the best place to do that?
So you can go to the website, so www.311institute.com. I've got codexes, so I've got I've written a series of what I call Codex of the Future. So there's one called the Exponential Technology Codex, which is 2020 to 2070. It's got over 250 exponential technologies in there. It tells you what they are, why they are, who cares, basically what they're being used to design, build, and create, and where they sort of all are. I've got a little content library on there as well. So you can go down there, and I've got keynotes and podcasts and all sorts of articles and other sort of bits and bobs. I run a daily blog as well. So there's thousands of articles on future innovations on there. And then they can reach out to me. Always happy basically to take any queries or questions. I love hearing all that sort of stuff. And then in terms of education, there's Exponential University, which is literally just go to the 311 Institute website and you'll see a little link there. And it's one of my passions. Part of the reason why I really got into doing what I do is because I want to help people reach what I call their exponential potential. We've all got a huge amount of potential within us, basically, to do a lot more than we already do. And society might put us down, companies might try and put us down, but Exponential U is a sort of, we've got a futures curriculum on there, basically, which is a practical. I'm doing the theory side now, or actually the other way around. It's got a theory side, and I'm doing the practical piece now. And you can go and have a mooch around there, basically, and learn how to become a futurist and see all this strange stuff, because it's all out there. It's, if you really want to sort of see the future and see what's coming, it's a case of joining lots and lots and lots and lots of dots together. And it's getting more complex, it's getting faster, but the things that you thought of as science fiction, because I'll reiterate this, all of the things that you thought of as science fiction are already here. Go and have a look at a hologram video, and that'll blow your mind. So think of the Princess Leia hologram. We kind of have that now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I've got loads of content out there. Just go and mooch it, basically critique it, criticize it, tell me it's great, rubbish, or whatever it happens to be. Ask me if you've got any questions, and let's see basically what we can all go and build together.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for sharing your insight, again, your passion for what you do. We appreciated you being a part of the One event, and we loved having you here today. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Keri. That's it. And great talking to you. And thank you to everyone for listening. And I hope you found it enjoyable.
If you like this episode or have a question, join the discussion on Twitter at Ingram Tech Soul with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
So did you love that as much as I did? I get so excited about these conversations. The future doesn't have to feel scary. In fact, it can be exciting. So I ask you, how will your business be taking on the future of work? Will you and your leadership team be having a real discussion, an action plan, or maybe will you even start something new? Either way, as Matt mentioned, one of my favorite Japanese words, ikigai, which means to try to do work that uses your passions, what you're great at, helps people, and brings you money.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, hosted by Keri Roberts. This episode was sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production with Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform.